Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Daily Fringe Show. Today I'm standing in for Nick Lorimer again today. He's still busy moving. It's one last day of me. I think Nicholas should be back tomorrow. But I'm joined by two of my colleagues. We have a special guest from the Cape again, Michael Morris. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Morris. Good to be chatting again.
And my other colleague, I'm sure you all know quite well, Herman Pretorius, from the other side of the country, from Pretoria.
Yes, no, I must say, I'm glad that we can really unify people, even if it is just, geographically.
Exactly. The people from the Transvaal and the Cisvaal, I suppose you'd say, can be coming together. So that's what it's called. It's Transvaal. That's where it comes from.
That's not what it's called. Oh, but I love it. I'm going to start using it. It makes complete sense. I love it.
Where do you think Ciscar and Transcar comes from, then? Look, this side of the Kha River, that side of the Kha River.
Oh, yeah, look at. I mean, you are such a geophobe.
But anyway, we've got a bit to talk about today. I think something that's pretty concerning is an issue of the DA was on an oversight visit down in the Eastern Cape, and they were at a farm project down there at a place called the Montusini Dairy Project, and it turns out that 350 cows that were donated to this project have starved to death, and that's apparently out of an initial donation of 500 cows. So it's something I think we need to talk about. Michael, do you want to tell us a bit more about this issue?
Indeed. I mean, it's a classic illustration, really, of exactly the impact of the ineptitude, the bad policy, the bad management, or the absence of management in South Africa, and particularly regarding the whole issue of land reform and helping people who are living on the land to become better farmers, and the consequences here are just so vivid that it really makes a kind of perfect illustration of the argument we've been making about this for a long time. So here we have these 350 dairy cows literally left to starve to death at the state-funded dairy project in the Eastern Cape near Port St. John's. The farmers provided with local farmers who were, in fact, had been subsistence farmers. So this was now meant to be an endowment for them, something to help them to get ahead. They were given these things. They were given state-of-the-art equipment for the milking process. That eventually couldn't be used because the Eskom disconnected electricity from the farm because of unpaid electricity fees, and there was insufficient feed. So literally, the place ran out of all it took to keep going, and the cows were left to die and starve to death. This was a no less than a 43 million rand project, so it's a huge kind of taxpayer burden. But the consequence, of course, is the people who now have been presented with this opportunity, and which has now failed to a very, very large extent, not because of their own fault, are now themselves without food, without a source of income, and so on. So it's a cost and a burden even to the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries of it. The project is situated on 337 hectares of communal land, and it was meant to benefit some 500 individual households under communal tenure. And the argument that we've been making all along is that land reform is essential, it's important, desirable, it's also possible. But at the center of it, in our argument, must be the notion of successful farming. And it is less or much less to do, almost nil to do with availability of land. There's plenty of land available. The government's own research into this under the high-level panel chaired by Khlem Motlanthe brought this out. Land purchases are not the issue. The real issue is support, extension services, proper training, and so on. And this case in the Eastern Cape illustrates exactly all these deficiencies, and precisely why actually the current land reform approach is quite wrong.
and also shows you how everything is linked. I mean, it's all quite complex because of the failures of Eskom. This also led to these cows not being able to get milked, and people couldn't sell the milk on, which meant they lost out on income and all kinds of things. And probably, I'm sure a lot of these guys were dedicated, but they possibly didn't have the skills and support as you need, as you said. So which just leads to, I mean, now this is 40 million rand down the drain. If it had been thought through a bit better, maybe they could have been used better.
Okay.
And then a successful farm. So, and Herman, what do you make of this?
Well, no, I concur with absolutely everything Michael has said, but I mean, I don't know a lot about farming. This may come as a surprise to everyone. I know I give off very, very strong rural vibes, but I'm actually very much an urbanite, despite the fact that every time that it gets a bit, wet weather, I kind of get this urge to say that I feel the rain coming in my knee, and I have a suspicion that's just a genealogical inheritance of when it was something should happen on a farm. But
maybe it's a genetic memory from a wound from the Boer War or something.
I'm going to claim that in the same way that Julius Malema has street cred. So, so the thing is, dairy farming is actually quite a bloody complex business. Of all the farmings that I've, types of agricultural activity that I've encountered and spoken to people about, it really is on a chemical or biochemical level quite challenging. I mean, the cows need to eat at the right time, the right volumes, the right grass, the right, this content and that content. They need
need special feed. They can't even just eat ordinary grass. They need special feed.
It's a very, very complex thing. And then also this number of cows, if you are not going to feed them, if I understand correctly, you need about 2,000 hectares for usual grazing. And they only had as Michael said, 337 hectares here for these cows. So everything here was wrong. I mean, if there's one thing that you're going to start out as an entry-level agricultural endeavor, I have no idea how they got to dairy farming. It really is unnecessarily complex. To start with strawberries and pecan nuts, for Pete's sake. I mean, and then, but this is just, it speaks of a level of incompetence and misunderstanding that is so deep, or corruption where, someone's contact, someone's cadre had some, connection to the dairy business, and therefore some things were bought and they thought, oh, we've got a farm, let's make it a dairy farm because then so-and-so will get some patronage. So it's either staggering incompetence or absolutely devious corruption. And the real thing here is us three white, male, cisgendered South Africans. I'm sorry, I think I might have upset Michael with that remark.
I might upset, but I'm sure we'll come back.
We have no suffering going on from these kind of failures. The only thing that you and I really lose is the taxes we pay, but our hopes weren't high to begin with. Here we have 500 families that were peasant farmers, productive seeming peasant farmers, that managed in some way to at least generate some means of subsistence farming. They were kicked off by the government to then be engineered into dairy farmers, amateur dairy farmers, underfunded, undertrained in the most complex agricultural endeavor they could possibly be dumped into. And now you've got their very livestock starving purely because of state incompetence or state deviousness here. It is so aggravating because these people did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong. And now the state has dumped them into this pit latrine. And it's just this compounding effect of people who were made poor by the apartheid regime being kept poor by this regime. And I just think it's utterly disgusting. And I really hope this blows up. Somehow, I don't think it will, but I really hope it does, because it communicates so vividly everything that is wrong with the state's approach to this issue, to land, to black people, as these infants that need nanny state, that can't stand on their own 2 feet. It's just, it really
also, It's an issue of centralization. Now, somebody in Pretoria thinks they know what's best for these people down in the Eastern Cape. They've decided you guys are all going to be a bunch of dairy farmers now. Who knows? Maybe, I mean, some of these people would probably actually prefer to go get a job in East London or Port Elizabeth, but because of the state of the country, that's also not actually feasible. So they're kind of stuck trying to scratch out a living on a piece of ground. It's probably quite fertile. And the Eastern Cape is one of the most fertile pieces of land in the country. But now they get told by some official from Pretoria comes and says, you guys are all going to get turned into dairy farmers now. No, these people even want to be dairy farmers, and it's clear they didn't have the skills, they weren't given the support. And as you say, Herman, through no fault of their own, this has been a failed project, and for all the consequences that's going to have. Michael, there we go. I was going to say we had nefarious elements that were trying to get rid of you. We don't know if it was NIA or whatever, but we managed to get you back. But yeah, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yes, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything both of you said, and there's this quite tragic illustration of the consequences of all these difficulties and problems which have been kind of imposed on these people. Is the news report that these 315 dairy cows at the farm produced only 350 liters per day in July, and it's just a pathetic illustration. Each cow should in fact be producing between 20 and 30 liters a day, and it's simply because there's insufficient feed, there's insufficient training. The whole thing has been just patched together, and literally, as you've been saying, imposed on people from afar, as if this is a great favor, and in fact it's a disaster.
And I'm sure, I mean, if somebody came and took the three of us and said, by the way, you can run a dairy farm now, I'm sure we'd probably be even less successful. So it's not just something you can, maybe if our colleague Frans Cornier, who's a bit of a farmer, he could possibly help us, but the rest of us, I think, would be in a bit of trouble. So,
Marius, I think that also plays into what our polling has been showing for years, is there isn't this great desire for the average black South African to get a spit of land, a pumpkin, a goat, and a cow, and then that's going to be fulfillment. That's their identity. That's what they really want. There's literally no data point indicating that. We have strong data points indicating the opposite. We have the fact that more than 90% of land claims ended up in monetary compensation in the land claims process. We have our polling showing that the ANC before the 2019 election had their own internal polling showing that this fictitious desire of going back to a Marxian agricultural Afro-socialist heaven, really, I mean, I know it is a trope that we so often tread out, but this has failed every time it's been tried. Every single time.
It's this hankering for past that never existed.
Yes, and then we are called the people. Hankering for the good old days. My goodness, we would settle for the mediocre old days of Mbeki and Mandela when there was actually job creation and none of this nonsense.
Exactly. But yeah, I think it's something to be concerned about and something to keep an eye on. And I mean, this points to the failures of land reform in South Africa. It's kind of done top down and not taking into account what people actually need or want. But carrying on, keeping on the theme of centralization, it seems that the National Coronavirus Command Council, and that's still what it's called, who knows what it's called, that could be, I don't know, the Politburo or whatever the case may be. It seems that they are thinking of taking South Africa into level 2 lockdown over Easter. And that will mean that there's probably going to be a stricter curfew from 10 o'clock instead of midnight. There won't be, alcohol won't be allowed to be sold from Friday to Sunday, and there'll be restrictions on gatherings. And there's also talk about possibly restrictions on interprovincial travel. So, Herman, what do you make of this? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the first thing that we must make clear is that this is early days. I mean, it's Wednesday today. This will probably be discussed tomorrow, which is Thursday, if I remember my days of the week correctly. And we're looking at a situation where this is early speculation reported on, but this wouldn't come as a surprise to me, taking into account the global context, taking into account that most governments still don't know what they're doing. And I have a remarkable amount of sympathy for governments in this regard. And I know that's not a terribly popular thing to say, but I think there's a real danger here in going for simple solutions when it's quite obviously a complex situation. So I've got sympathy with the government on this. But the thing that really stood out for me from this early reporting is the quotes from sources close to the National Coronavirus Command Council that really cuts into the ideological makeup here and almost the discussion that we've been having. I quote from the News 24 article, which we take as coverage from whence it comes, but it seems to me to not make any spurious claims, and it seems to me to fit the national and global context. But cabinet ministers who are part of the NCCC are lobbying for large church gatherings to be allowed over Easter because, quote, churches have been behaving. And I just think that tells you everything here. I mean, if these people really cared about the scientific epidemiological effect of lockdowns, they would say, whether you're behaving or not, I mean, sorry, tough cookie. Exactly. This is what is needed. This is what's demanded. That's the virus measures that we're taking. But it's like a bargaining chip. It's the nanny state coming in and say, you've been good boys, so you get your freedom back, but don't let me see you play with the ball in the house. It's
but
just
that's exactly
so infuriating.
It's the government's, that's one thing I've said about the ANC government. In a lot of ways, consider South African subjects and not citizens. We saw Becky Cele say same kind of things at I think it was the end of last year. He said, we're going to go into a high level of lockdown and South Africans don't know how to behave. But a lockdown should have nothing to do with behavior. It should be to do with the virus. Even if everybody's breaking lockdown rules, but the COVID pandemic seems to have receded, then it's fine. You don't bring it back just because people are behaving. You need to watch if the infections are going up, and whether that is a reason to make regulations stricter again.
And before I, absolutely just talk myself into an aneurysm on this point from sheer frustration, this is what we mean when we say people should care about the ideological questions here, because this is an ideological decision being made by people who use this excuse, this circumstance of global pandemic, to advance ideological causes. We're not saying that, ideology is some conspiracy theory with smoke cigar-filled rooms where they plot the overthrow.
I think Herman seems to be, are you still there, Herman?
Everything that we hold dear. But ideology is, am I back?
Yes, there you go. You can repeat yourself.
Sorry. So an ideology is a framework within which a politician or a government takes actions. And it is because of the ideological imperative here that they are treating South Africans as like children. This is not, if only there were more competent politicians there. No, this isn't a question of competence. This is a question of ideology. And I put it to South Africans. Are you willing to go along with this? Are you willing to have this never-ending Daddy Cyril and Mama Andy Z deciding for you what is necessary? And to say just to repeat what I said earlier, if they were going scientifically about this, and I disagreed with the science, I could at least say, right, there's no conditions here, there's no negotiations. If the science demands it, the science demands it. But this notion that you can kind of dole out rewards, and it's sick. It really, really is nauseating, and it's infantilizing the South African people in the same way as the Eastern Cape Dairy Farm, group project homework assignment did.
Michael, do you have any sympathy for the NCCC? It's easy for us to, I think all of us here are probably against lockdowns, but it's also easy for us to say that lockdowns are a terrible idea. We don't have to worry about the number of people dying in hospitals and whatever the case is. So, I agree with Harry. I also have a lot of sympathy with governments, but I'm also glad my name's not sort of Ramaphosa or Boris Johnson needing to make these decisions.
No, indeed. And I think, Herman has acknowledged that too, that right at the start of his comments. And I think you're right. It's not as easy as I think perhaps a lot of people think. They imagine that it's possible to make a right decision every week in confronting this virus, and the environment has changed so dramatically. I think over the past year, how much more we know about it, and perhaps in how much more we don't know about it. But one of the things that which is underlined for me is, whatever the lockdown might achieve in protecting people or curbing the spread of the virus, what we're going to be constantly confronting is the consequences of our complete fiasco with vaccinations. That is really the thing that ought to be the focus. This is going to reduce the vulnerability of the population, of people going to church, celebrating Easter, and so on. Going off and figuring out that we should have 50 or 75 people or 150 people, that's might have some kind of impact somewhere. But the one thing we do know is that we have a proper vaccination inoculation program. That is really what the state's response should be focused on with all vigor and all energy, and it's not, of course. We've got a terrible fiasco. So, but yeah, I mean, it's not an easy atmosphere for the government or anybody to be making decisions in, and to
there's people who really your hardcore libertarians will tell you that the state has three functions. That's to enforce contracts, to protect the state from external, protect the people of the state from external attack, and to help fight pandemics. And we've shown, the fact that we haven't been able to, we've vaccinated 180,000 people, which is, I think, a third of the number the UK is doing per day. I mean, it's absolutely, it's ridiculous, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of plan to fight this. And without a vaccine, we might have another third wave, which means we'll go into another lockdown, and that's how many jobs and economic activity destroyed. And that's not even to talk about then the people who will die from COVID, because they weren't vaccinated, because the government's been sitting on its hands rather than throwing everything at this effort to get vaccines. And this countries that are far poorer than us have vaccinated a far larger proportion of their population. We are already doing very poorly on this, and it's actually disgraceful. Herman?
Yeah, I think that what we should also take into account is that South Africa historically has done best when we've been in sync with the global economy. The fact that we are not able to really participate in global trade or global economic travel, or the fact that, tourism is massive for us, commodity shipping, all those links to the global economy is really, really crucial to getting food on the table here. And so we've got all the sort of immediate frustrations of not getting our house in order when it comes to vaccinating the country. But then we also have these restrictions that bar us from global trade that really historically has been one of the most powerful forces to lift South Africans out of poverty and unemployment. So I just think that it all really boils, and one doesn't want to be simplistic, but this all really in the main boils down to a state seizing control of a crisis and then bungling it. There are incidents in the world where the state has seized control and not bungled it, and I wouldn't want to live in one of those states, but at least they've got something to show for the civil liberties that they've traded. Here we've traded civil liberties, we've traded economic liberties in exchange for really nothing, in exchange for, at best, an even more brutal state, an even more brutal South Africa, where, again, it's not the white middle class suffering, it's the black South African poor and the white South African poor and the colored South African poor, the people always left behind when someone in Pretoria thinks they know best. And it strikes me that again, Kate, I'm like a broken record. The ideological dimension of this really must be appreciated. Number one, South Africa has been making pharmaceutical companies across the globe angry for a decade. So we have an ideological antagonism towards the people we now expect to provide us with a cure to this vaccine. We have a government that seized control, made it impossible for businesses to earn, at the same time still expecting them to pay taxes, at the same time still expecting them to not fire people, and it's just they made everything difficult. You cannot operate, but you have to keep your employees. We can't help you with UIF. We can't help you with grants because the fiscal cupboard is bare. At every step of the way, instead of actually being part of the solution, the state has almost without fail. I know that's simplistic and quite broad, and you can poke holes in it, but almost without fail, throughout the last year, government has been part of the problem and not the solution. And I'm reminded of about almost 20 years ago when and I've mentioned this before on the show, when the Health and Racket Club gym franchise was about to go under. Nelson Mandela picked up the phoned Richard Branson and said, I've got 4,000, 6,000, 7,000 jobs here on the line. I think you want to start a leisure franchise in South Africa. And that was the birth of Virgin Active, the greatest oxymoron in corporate branding. But the president was able to use his prestige locally and internationally to actually show leadership and save a few thousand jobs. The ANC is so decrepit today, and the leader of that party is so diminished that the same couldn't even be done to save a few million lives. And I think that's sad.
And Michael, so do you think that this is going to, we'll see any backlash of this at all at the polls if we do have our local government election later in the year, which my money is on that we will have it, but do you think there'll be any kind of backlash against the ANC? We have seen ANC being losing support for a number of elections now, and more people are actually opting out to not vote at all. But will we see, as I say, any kind of backlash at the polls, do you think?
Difficult to say, but I think certainly for all the reasons that Herman has identified, there is this kind of growing sense of apathy, really, I think is what it is. Just an expectation that we're not going to get the solutions. There's not going to be any, decisive, vigorous intervention in our lives in a sensible kind of way, or in the economy, policy reform, and so on. Solutions are not actually being sought, and people just kind of they kind of accept this as the condition of our lives, of our time. And that's a very bad thing, obviously. And I think eventually it does reflect in a kind of political reaction. People will actually begin to make different choices. But the worst thing is, in a way, that people decide that it's actually not worth voting at all. But I mean, certainly one hopes that people are seeing this very vivid illustration of just how bad the mismanagement is, and that the solution really is to choose different governors. It really comes down to that. So yeah, but you're really much more of a pollster and a poll watcher than I am. What's your feeling about it?
I think there's a possibility that they will lose support, and also a possibility that they won't. So let me hedge my bets. So, and Herman, in last minute, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think the ANC could get hurt at the polls because of this?
I think so, but if they don't, the opposition will only have themselves to blame. And I think if I really have a gripe with South African politics over the last 15 years, it's the fact that opposition parties have positioned themselves to compete for an ever-shrinking pool of opposition votes, just so that they can, maintain their proportional status in parliament and legislatures. I remember working for the DA, and we were actively working for the election campaign, and there was active efforts to get ACDP votes. And I did, that was one of the days where the mirror just broke for me. The real challenge, and this is where the DA, I think, still has a window of opportunity if it acts quickly, is to show non-voters that it is worth voting for. And that's the real challenge with opposition voters. It's not that you have to take voters from other parties. Just we can a party that is able to take all the votes of all people who are entitled to vote and who didn't vote will be able to form a majority government. Now, it's not that simple, of course, but here's a perfect opportunity for someone like the DA to show that they govern a province and they have the opportunity here to purchase vaccines or make it available to their people. So if the ANC does not suffer the consequences of this, I mean, this might be convoluted and cruel, but it'll be the opposition who will be responsible for giving them that out.
I think on that very positive note, we're going to wrap it up. That's all we've got time for this afternoon. Thanks to everybody who listened. Nick Lorimer will be joining you again today. And if you want to see some of our other content, go to dailyfriend.co.za. You'll be able to see my writing, Michael's writing, and Harriman's writing there. and some a lot of other contributors. So yeah, go check it out, and thanks for listening.